So it's great to be here. IFPRI and IRRI are two centers in the CGIAR with which aid has probably had the longest and strongest relationship. And if somebody from CIMMYT is here, I might add that one too, to not insult them. So it's great to be here. And I have to say, Bob, it's really impressive what a focused research program can do. Bob's talk underscores the importance of the value of productivity gains in staples. Many producing families benefit. Everyone who eats the commodity, which is pretty much everybody in those countries, benefits, the poor benefiting the most. And I think you also underscored the dynamic nature of the Green Revolution. It's something that's ongoing. We are still needing to stay ahead of pests and diseases, which we've had to do for a long time, but we're also, as you just saw, into new things that we didn't dream of a generation ago. So flood tolerance is one good example, heat tolerance, drought tolerance, salinity tolerance, all kinds of things that we collectively call abiotic stress. And it's very fitting to be talking about abiotic stress this week. I don't know how many were up in New York, but if you weren't there, you probably heard about the events of the past few days. It was a great pleasure to be there and hear both Secretary Vilsack, Secretary Kerry, and many leaders from other countries underscore the connectedness of food security, climate, agriculture. And in fact, we had the launch on Wednesday afternoon of the Alliance for Climate Smart Agriculture. That's something that, along with the US, the World Bank, FAO, Norway, the Netherlands, and now many other partners from Africa and Asia are stepping up to be part of. And Feed the Future, which is the US government's food security initiative, has always had climate, gender, and environment as three cross-cutting issues. What's different now is climate smart agriculture has a somewhat different definition because it's about productivity gains and income gains. We all want that. It's about the gains in adaptation and resilience to climate shocks, which is always featured, but it also integrates the third area of mitigation. In other words, what can agriculture do to reduce the agricultural footprint that is, depending how you measure it, anywhere from about 18% to nearly 30% of driving climate change. I think the larger number imputes changes in land use, especially around tropical forests, which some good news we heard this week is really plummeting. So maybe all the investment in agriculture in the last few years is paying off in terms of the health of our critically important tropical forests. But I'm sure there'll be other people talking about that sometime soon. So at its heart, Climate Smart is triple win: productivity and income, adaptation, and mitigation gains. Some of us have heard about this for a while, and we hear about money. I haven't seen the money yet, but maybe that will come. But we don't have to wait. Triple wins are good. The virtue is its own reward in this case. So think about conservation agriculture. We increase water use efficiency, we reduce cultivation and energy use, we increase soil organic matter, moisture holding capacity. So there's both mitigation and adaptation going on there, as well as gains in income. There's many other examples. We could think about vetiver grass along contour slopes that helps more water penetrate the soil so that the farmer gets more resilience, but there's also less erosion, more organic matter, and the farm is better protected from severe precipitation events, which climate scientists tell us are going to increase in the future. Another one that probably everyone's heard about is the deep placement urea, the briquettes, which has you get a higher yield using less fertilizer. There's less denitrification of nitrogenous gases into the atmosphere that are important greenhouse gases. It's a way of reducing the footprint of the climate footprint of flooded rice. Another one, if Dennis Garrity's around these days, he'll be talking about evergreen agriculture in Africa, which is the integration of what we call fertilizer trees. These are leguminous trees into systems, and they can have a tremendous impact on yields of maize, even without adding nitrogenous fertilizer, which in itself is a very energy-intensive process. The Haber process by which we fix nitrogen is efficient, but it is energy-intensive. So that we've seen maize yields in places like Malawi and Zambia who are adopting this go from 1 to 4 tons per hectare. And these are often smallholders, so that's a spectacular change. Forest managed farmer regeneration in the Sahel, another great story about a desertification nightmare being turned into a sustainable, productive, and carbon storing ecosystem. So wherever we can exploit these triple wins, we should do it. And so far, so good. But now we're seeing that the alliance is about promoting the triple win. We need to think about where it's feasible and where it isn't. And why is that? Well, because the triple win idea has to be juxtaposed with other goals. If we look at Feed the Future, for example, our top line metrics are poverty reduction on the one hand and stunting reduction on the other. I mean, frankly, I've spent the last couple of years being stunned by having to be responsible for stunting because it's such a big lift for agriculture, and it really we have to think completely differently with other communities, with the nutrition community, with the health community. We have to think about things like environmental enteropathy. We have to think about things like women's time and care. So that's a huge lift in and of itself, and that's why Congress is giving us our money. And then it still has to be about income generation. So to all of a sudden say, well, also let's store some carbon, that may just be, it may be possible, but it may not be. So at AID, what we are doing is we're sometimes loosely calling ourselves climate smarter in some situations because we're doing a double win. We're doing the productivity gain and we're doing the adaptation and resilience gain. But in some of these systems, we can't really make a mitigation gain. In fact, well, I'll say more about this. In many areas, we actually will see rises in greenhouse gas generation, but very importantly, reductions per unit productivity. So that's what you have to think about. In other words, if we're going to help people get out of poverty and hunger, we've got to think about how to help them up their game, and that may include absolute increases in emissions, but not per unit productivity. So this is me, right? Okay, and do I, oh, what do I do now? That, oh, he's going to do it back, okay. So in Feed the Future, there are 7 program areas, and the heart of them is a concept in the research strategy, 7 program areas. The heart of this is what we call sustainable intensification. This is the concept that says if we're going to meet our nutrition and poverty goals, we're going to have to be able to increase both the flux and the efficiency of nutrients and smallholder systems. The resource use efficiency, allowing a higher value from offtake while sustaining the environment, the productive environment. Fortunately, these things can often go together. What we see is that as nutrients go up, I do the wrong thing. Oh, thank you very much, Simon. So this is a picture that shows you our 7 program areas that are flagged. So sustainable intensification basically envisions smallholders giving them the ability to make a better life by increasing their productivity and decreasing their risk. Much of sustainable intensification is climate smart. It emphasizes resource use efficiency, increased biomass, carbon sinks, integration of perennials, and we are working also on our component technology program. So we're looking at climate resilient cereals, flood tolerant rice, heat tolerant wheat, already a big problem in South Asia. Heat tolerant maize, a much bigger problem than we knew about just a few years ago. Heat tolerance in rice, where high nighttime temperatures depress fertility of the rice spikelets. So salinity tolerance. We also are looking at our legume programs. Legumes, in addition to being nutritious and in addition to being high value for producers, also are very good for the environment because they add nitrogen to the soil and increase soil fertility, thus somewhat reducing the amount of fertilizer that might be otherwise needed. We also are looking at advanced approaches. This is the middle one of the top for our long-term research programs, where we use advanced technologies to combat pests and diseases. So we're looking at diseases that include things that are directly linked to climate, like late blight in potato, where we see changes. We're also black sigatoka in banana, maybe not linked to climate, but very intensive use of energy in terms of all the spraying that has to go on to control it. So when, if you think of a system approach to agriculture, you really can look for opportunities to be more efficient and to reduce the carbon footprint along the production and the value chain. And in looking in the middle, our medium-term programs, or towards the bottom, you see nutritious and safe foods. This is another one where we are thinking about how to help farmers do high-value crops like vegetables, which have critical transport needs or cooling needs. We have some experimentation going on with solar coolers. I'm not saying that's the answer, but again, there's lots of ways to think about energy use along the system. Animal source foods, big push for us because we believe they're so important, particularly to dealing with child nutrition. And you probably know, as I do, that ruminants in particular get vilified as a source of greenhouse gases. And of course, to some degree they are. But frankly, we're much more concerned at this point about trying to figure out how smallholders can participate in the livestock revolution that is going to happen. The higher incomes that are growing in the developing world are going to lead to dietary shifts. It's already happened. It's one of the reasons we saw the big spike in demand, in prices in the last 10 years. So we want to get out ahead on that, and not just on ruminants, but also thinking about poultry. How can smallholders be part of poultry production? So it's not just transferring technologies the way we do here, it's trying to be creative and have them serve the poverty needs, which is always, for us, through the smallholder. On the policy side, 4 kilograms per hectare of fertilizer use in Africa is not going to cut it. We're not going to get to food security in that situation. We need policy, we need markets to operate better, we need governance, we need transit times at borders to be less, all sorts of things that can both lower the footprint of the whole process, but also provide farmers with a critical input. So that's another area where I think, basically everything we're doing has an entry into a climate secure future. Capacity building, I'm not going to go into that. You've probably heard it before. It's critical. It's how we get sustainability. But just to say that we go from analytics and policy through R&D, extension, education, and very importantly, entrepreneurship. And there's a whole nother side of the Bureau of Food Security and Feed the Future that's very focused on that, but I'm not going to hit on that today. But it's also is a place where, as I said, we need to be thinking of the whole food system in terms of climate smart. So let's see there. So we want to intensify, but that we have to do it via smallholders, which is hard. We have to do it, we need the best technologies, and we need to think about how to get these at scale. And obviously there's no silver bullets out there. Many things are going to matter. So here's where we're often starting with a very single crop, poor water use efficiency, a lot of evaporation, a lot of runoff, soil erosion during storms. So what can we do? We can start to get to improved systems by bringing in legumes, perennials, water control, irrigation. The integration of livestock is sort of a holy grail for us in terms of trying to get incomes up in smallholder mixed systems. The key issue there is biomass, again, very critical in the whole climate discussion. And I sometimes wonder if we shouldn't be doing more on feed and fodder. And then in terms of this more resilient system that we're seeing here, we can also think about things that give us really nice climate outcomes, such as are listed here. So there's a lot about sustainable intensification that is climate smart. Don't get me wrong, it really is. It's just that it may in some cases mean increased absolute emissions, but reduced per unit productivity. And that process, those two things, are critical in terms of getting us to our poverty and nutrition outcomes. Just a little bit too, to not lose track of the science, you can see we're breeding for higher temperature, photosynthetic efficiency, biofortification, weed management through advanced science, water use efficiency, nitrogen use efficiency, another important trait that we're working with. And often we're working with the private sector and the public sector, especially U.S. universities, but also other partners, and of course the CGIAR. And then let's go on to this is the program we have in South Asia, just to mention it, but you can see that it's a mix and it's public and private. And the key thing I want you to take away from this is that it is the staple yield growth that potentiates the diversity. So the work that IRRI and CIMMYT are doing, that's critical to getting the diversification that's going to drive this poverty reduction that we're seeing associated with. And then the question now is, how do we do that in Africa? So we're trying to do that with Africa Rising, which Jerry Glover leads, and you may have encountered that before. But I want to end by telling you about the challenges we're facing. I'm asking for your help, because what we're finding in Africa in particular is that we can only get so far with improved technologies, and it's not far enough to get people out of poverty, and the risk aversion factor is enormous. So I think we've got to think about things well beyond technology. That's not new. I think we've got to look at things like maybe cooperatives. What can we do to smooth risk? Means of expanding or clever use of credit. Obviously the information piece that Bob already mentioned. Information not about weather, but also information about markets and prices. Will Masters' paper shows declining farm sizes in Africa at the poorer end of things. Are we going to reach non-economic limits there? How do we deal with that? We also know that many of these households have multiple income streams. So they don't want to put all their eggs in the farm basket. But we want to think about economic conditions and clever ways to try to aggregate and reduce risk. So this could be service provision, which we've seen. Private sector service provision in Bangladesh is going fantastically. And I was in Nigeria last year, and a guy had a little motorbike with a pump that attached to the side that he was pumping up. And if you imagine the importance of that in terms of reducing women's drudgery who used to carry the water, it's tremendous. And we're not talking about irrigating hectares. If people could have a 20th of a hectare where they could grow vegetables off season or keep goats or chickens, this could start us on a reduced risk, increased potential for investment cycle. But we need help. We're not there yet. We're working on it. And I know the policy agenda, Schengen, is going to be critical to helping us get there, whether it means, I use the bad word, subsidy, but I just did hear about a subsidy that was time limited in Mozambique, where it went away after a couple of years and the growers are still buying the fertilizer. So maybe there's some things to be learned in that area as well. Also, I didn't say anything about the how, but clearly we've got to do this in partnership with the Africans, the Asians, and the Latin Americans. This has to be country-led, just like everything else. If they don't think it's worth doing, we're not going to think it's worth doing. So that has to happen. We need these creative approaches. I am also a bright spot. Tom Jane, if you've heard him lately, is saying that market constraints in Africa are lessening. And I think that's partly about wealth accumulation, partly perhaps about infrastructure improvements. But that's something that we may not be in the Sasakawa Global 2000, produce and then collapse that we saw 20 years ago or 15 years ago. The markets may be more resilient and better able to adopt. But we still have to think about a value chain approach, which is the heart of Feed the Future. But I think it seems like we may have some good opportunities. So we know that smallholder transformation can occur. It occurred in Asia. It's got to occur in Africa if we're going to achieve our goals. It's going to take things like irrigation, mechanization at small scale. It's going to mean more energy use, but at the end of the day, it'll be a more climate resilient, more prosperous, better fed Africa that we're looking at. So thank you very much for your attention. I look forward to sharing your remarks.